leadership is not an innate skill. There are very few born leaders. It's a learned skill. So, those who really learn to lead, I've watched people lead in horrible organizations. And when they go and move organizations, their people come with them.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Mark Silverman, who will share how to master your time and to-dos. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote is from Charlie Munger. An example of a really responsible system is the system the Romans used when they built an arch. The guy who created the arch stood under it as the scaffolding was removed. It's like packing your own parachute. Are you responsible? And do you get the work done and done right? That is part of what we're going to talk about today. Making sure you're focused and on the right action steps and have the time to do them. But before we get to that, let's review last week's action step, which was when it comes to money, looking forward, what's the number? How much do you need? How do you pay yourself first and move towards that? Honestly, the way to do this is to automate it to make it happen. This is a game changer. I assure you, this is a responsible system for money. We're going to talk about it a little bit later on the business side as well with Mark. So, do you feel overwhelmed with life and work? Do you know how to say no? We're going to chat about that and so much more today. It takes time to build the life you want. And we can't follow other people's paths exactly unless you exactly want what they have. And even then, it may still not work. The real genius is taking the clues and then creating your path to the life you want. Our guest, Mark Silverman, is no stranger to overcoming adversity and mastering his own overwhelm. He's the best-selling author of Only Tens, Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life. Mark helps CEOs and senior leadership teams focus on making the right work get done in their organization. He's also host of the Mastering Overwhelm, How to Thrive in Business, Relationships, and Life podcast. And he's working on his third book. Let's meet Mark. Welcome to Richer Soul, Mark Silverman. It's great to have you join us today.
I am thrilled to be here. I just love talking to you even before you turn the microphone on. So this is going to be great.
And I am excited for our conversation. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Both my parents did not graduate high school. So my father ran a burger and shake and then a Hardee's and a Burger King. So he was a manager of a fast food restaurant. And my mother finally went to work in this furniture store. So what I learned was we were poor. We were the only poor Jews I knew because the rest of my family had money. I found out later that, we're not all affluent. So I grew up on Long Island and money was always tight. We couldn't afford anything.
Well, that's because you lived on Long Island.
Our house was $13,000 when my parents bought it, right? We drove cars that had rust, through the floor so you could see the ground. And my parents somehow gave us a lower middle class life with that. So what did I learn about money? That there wasn't enough of it, that we weren't the type of people to have it, and that you have to be unbelievably careful, and that you could never order a drink in a restaurant. You always have to put sweet and low and lemon in the water if you want a drink in a restaurant.
You said we weren't the type of people to have it.
Right.
What does that mean?
Other people went to college. Other people had money, scraped by. We weren't going to be the people who made it in life. And so when I looked at other people going to college in my family and that kind of thing, it was foreign to me. It wasn't us. So yes, that's what I learned. We were the poor people in the family, and that consciousness, stayed with me. I've never talked about this, so I'm stumbling over it because I haven't had this conversation except maybe in a journal about my money consciousness. So it's an interesting thing to say out loud.
Most people don't have this conversation.
Right.
And that's kind of why we asked the question, because part of it is most of the people who come on this podcast are highly successful. And yet many of them have a similar background to yours. So it's not where you start that determines where you end up. And I think that's part of it. And I think for a lot of people, their money scripts are unconscious.
Right. I also learned that if I want something, I need to steal it. So my brother, from a very young age, started working in restaurants, and he had tips. So he kept a cigar box full of cash. So if I wanted to go out for pizza, if I wanted to go buy a joint, if I wanted to go do any of that stuff, I stole money from my brother. And I just, let's see, I'm 60 now. I just admitted to him that I stole a bunch of money from him when we were younger. If I wanted anything, I stole it from my brother.
What did he say?
He didn't care. Like at this point, he didn't care. But had I done it then, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you now because I wouldn't exist.
So how long did those mindsets hold you back in life?
How long did they hold me back? They held me back until probably after I got sober. So, the whole life story of me and drinking and drugs and alcohol and sex and the whole thing, like I was not a going concern through my 20s. We talked about this beforehand. I ended up homeless at 27, living in my truck, 135 pounds. Again, drove into Washington, D.C. because my brother owned a bunch of restaurants to borrow money from my brother so I could not live in my truck anymore. And my brother, God bless him, said, you're going to go to AA, you're going to enroll in college, and you're going to go to the gym with me. And I'm like, well, he owns nice restaurants. I'll eat. I'll live with him for a while. So I went to college. I got sober. And funny, when you take alcohol and all that stuff out of the mix, and you go to a program that's teaching you some life skills, and you get around people who are trying to do the same thing, things start to improve. So as I started working through things, I got married, I had kids, and I became a sales guy. Now it's interesting because I'm a rabid introvert. I had really low self-esteem. I didn't like to bother people, but I became a sales guy. I went to the Scientology church in Washington, D.C. and took their tests. And besides them telling me that I am a complete mess and that I have to enroll in all their programs, they also told me the only two choices for a career for me was sales or a lawyer. And I'm like, I'm not going to become a lawyer because I can barely do school. I will become a sales guy. And something about sales clicked. And I went from making $26,000 a year to making $52,000 a year. Then I was over $100,000. Then I was making $250,000 a year. I got into tech sales, and next thing I know, I am now upper middle class. Right? I'm a 5%er, maybe a 1%er. My ex-wife and I buy $1 million house. I buy a sports car. Right, where my kids are living in status symbol land. That's when things changed. Right. All of a sudden, I am now making more money than I spend. I still wouldn't buy like an iPhone or anything like that back then when it first came out. And my ex-wife, my now ex-wife, was pretty frugal. It was a weird thing for me to live in an affluent neighborhood. It was a complete culture shock.
How did that go?
As I say, we were talking about my podcast used to be called Mastering Midlife. And one of my premises of midlife is the drives and motivations that get you through your 20s and 30s often turn on you in your 40s and 50s. So the thing that got me to be a successful sales guy, which was I never want to be seen as a homeless guy. I never want to be seen as a drunk. I'm a loser and I don't want anybody to ever see that. So that's why I wore a gold watch and I had $125 ties and 100 shirts that were all over $100 a piece in my closet, right? I never wanted to be seen as that guy. That drive started to crack, right? I wasn't built for high-tech sales and that pressure and keeping and leading a family. My ex-wife stayed home, right? And that pressure started to crack on me. So stone cold sober, which was really kind of scary. All of a sudden I started getting sick. I started having panic attacks. My marriage fell apart. I couldn't sell anything. So everything fell apart. So I had my midlife crisis then, stone cold sober, and found myself living in a 1-bedroom apartment around the corner from my ex-wife and kids, wondering what the hell happened. Like I did everything right. I was a good boy. I did everything right. I worked really hard. And I still couldn't hold it together because that internal trauma and all that stuff from childhood, right? You know, as you said, what'd you learn about money? What I learned is I can't keep it, right? I don't belong here. So I blew everything up. And then now building everything back is why I'm where I am today, because I blew everything up, stone cold sober, and learned how to create a whole new life.
Interesting. So out of curiosity, it sounds like your brother didn't grow up with the same mindset you did around money.
No, my brother had a different personality than me. My brother decided that he was on his own from the time he was like 12 years old. He lived in our basement and that he was going to make his own money and he was going to make his own way. So my brother got jobs, took care of himself, bought his own car, and got out of the house as soon as he possibly could to take care of himself. Now, my brother also crashed and burned. So, you know, there was a reason he brought me into Alcoholics Anonymous and NA and all that stuff. He got sober first, but the Silverman boys didn't fare well on our own.
It sounds like it all worked out over time.
You know, over time, if there's some support, if there's some grace, if it does work out. I always get self-conscious. I wrote it on my whiteboard to do a solo podcast for myself. Every time I'm on one of these interviews, my life just seems so dramatic and like, who would ever want to live Mark's life? And now my life is so not dramatic, right? It's just so like I worked all that stuff out. So the last 10 years has been a beautiful thing that I was able to create. So yeah.
Eventually it works out. If you keep showing up, taking the next step and doing the work.
But I'll tell you, one of the reasons I do what I do is because I watched it not work out for a lot of people. I've watched a lot of people who it worked out until their 40s or 50s. And then, you know, the midlife crisis is, you know, when we're not listening to what spirit's trying to tell us and what life is trying to tell us as far as shifts and changes are concerned, you know, the affairs, the blowing up of marriages, the blowing up of your health, the blowing up of careers. I just watch it all the time. I watch, you know, women go into adrenal fatigue when they've overdone it and, you know, they just kind of face plant that way with their energy. Men tend to blow things up when they don't know what to do with how they're trapped in the life that they created.
So what's the root cause of all of that?
Thinking that I think it's because we live our programming up until a certain point. We live our traumas, we live our conditioning, we live what our parents said we should do or in reaction to what our parents said we should do for a certain amount of time. And then I think in our 40s and 50s is when we start to find out who we are. You know, we marry who we marry a lot because of our conditioning and who we think we're supposed to be. And then, you know, we tend to grow apart instead of, you know, going to counseling and going to workshops and intimacy workshops and having conversations to grow together. So when you come to that time, you know, the whole saying, you know, you climb the ladder and you found out it was on the wrong building. What happens is you panic instead of calmly saying, you know, oh my goodness, I am on the wrong ladder. I have spent all this time. I think I'm going to take measured and smart steps to shift my career into something that I'd really like to do. We just blow the whole shit up, right? And then we have to deal with all the fallout and all the pieces. And then we create a new life. And 5 years or 10 years later, we're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. For me, you know, I did the same thing and I watched it done over and over again. Instead of saying, wow, life is telling me my intimacy with my partner is not what it needs to be. let's see what we can do to work to get closer. It's much, much easier to go to Las Vegas, to a sales kickoff and have an affair, right? And that kind of thing. It's just so much easier to ignore the voice that's telling you things need to shift and you need to work on stuff and blow things up and make change. We're not, I don't think we're conditioned and taught to make measured, thoughtful, conscious shifts in our lives.
See, that's foreign to me, but I'm risk averse. So I look at all those things. I go, yeah, if I blow this up, I'm going to lose all this stuff. I don't want to lose all this stuff. So how do I not prevent the loss? And I think that's kind of been one of my underlying drivers from that. So I've been lucky because of that, but it also makes me risk averse.
It makes you risk averse. And, some people who would be risk averse that way would find themselves more slowly trapped. And then the pain of being in whatever it is they created is worse than the risk averse. You haven't done that. Maybe you've created a risk averse, but fulfilling life. Like you have a podcast, like you talk to the most interesting people, you read the best books. You're doing what I'm suggesting. You're learning, like you have a parade of people telling you ways to live, ways to improve your life, ways to expand your range every day if you go through all the episodes of this podcast that you've done. So you're doing what most of us have not been taught to do.
And that's part of what this is to show people a path forward. And because I've always struggled with it in the sense of I'd always look around and go, certain things are pretty simple. And there were certain non-negotiables in our life. And so I think because of that, I had a certain path. One non-negotiable is you never get divorced. That's just life. I wouldn't do that to my kids. So you have to figure it out. The other thing was building the financial plan because I knew, and this is not something we talk about very often, most people in their 50s will usually find at some point in their career, they're going to get kicked in the butt. Mm-hmm. It could be a recession. It could be a restructuring. And what I have noticed for a lot of them, even though they know they were coming, is the emotional toll to them really knocks them off the track. And if they haven't built a good financial base, they're screwed. Or they refuse to, more often than not, they refuse to be honest with themselves and their family and say, hey, we were on this wonderful track and now we're not on it anymore. We got to change our lifestyle. And I think for a lot of people, that's very difficult to do. So I built my life with the attitude that when I get knocked off the track, I'm going to create a landing zone and I'm going to say, screw you to everyone else and go a different direction, which is essentially what I did.
You're fortunate. A lot of people play it really safe, really careful, do everything right. They cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and still life throws them on their ass. Mm-hmm. And now what do? I'm coaching a 33-year-old, just stud of a guy, rock star, made a bonehead move, just got fired, right? His whole psyche, his whole character persona is predicated on this success. Mm-hmm. Right. And now it's taken away from him. So his midlife crisis is at 33. And he has to figure out who he is and create a whole new person from something different. I think it's the opportunity. I think you can turn something like that into the best thing that ever happened to you. I turned my personal tragedy into the best thing that ever happened to me. People can do that. It just takes a lot of work.
It does take a lot of work, and you have to keep showing up and keep doing it. And that's what it's all about. And that's what I find. Most people don't. We see that at the gym. Just the other day, I was reading the article. I think they said, I forget, January 16th or 22nd is the day that things drop off. So it's barely 3 weeks and people stop. They don't continue to do that. And that's a shame. You're not going to get out of what you did without continuing to show up and do the hard work.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because my back went out about 8-9 years ago, my back, and I was getting epidurals so I could walk, and I was supposed to have back surgery and I couldn't walk and I couldn't move. And the day before back surgery, I refused to have the surgery because I didn't like the doctor just gave me the worst vibe. and I crawled out of their office, and I healed my back in a number of different ways, and I took care of myself. But since then, my going to the gym, my caring for my body, I just turned 60 years old, is a non-negotiable. But it took that tragedy. It took that, like, I stretch every single day because I never want to feel that pain again. Right. So it takes that strategy to get that motivation.
It does. Sometimes we need that knockdown to
it's so interesting. What I'm noticing in this conversation is you and I are probably very opposite personality types, right? So you're a measured, thoughtful guy who creates your financial world, your physical world, your emotional world, and I spent my life being Ricochet Rabbit, a slave to my emotions, a slave to my appetites, and up and down and in and out. So for me to create a life the way you've created a life took a ton of work, a ton of scraping myself against the guardrails, right? And fighting against the guardrails because, again, I have these appetites. And now I would say I've created a similar life to you from a very different path.
And we all have to create our own path. I will tell you, I do hit guardrails. I've just learned not to crash through them, right? And I've learned to take the penalties along the way. Especially in the corporate world, you're going to play the game, but when you start to realize what the game is, and you start to realize the price you're going to pay for it, sometimes you take the smart way out. So I was in sales for a good part of my career, and I learned you can go up the corporate ladder, but every step up the corporate ladder, you got a small raise and a whole lot more responsibility and time. And I started doing the calculations. I'm like, I think it's smarter to work less and less and enjoy life. And just at the end of the day, the differential in pay, unless you were the one who made it, wasn't that great. And the cost of climbing the ladder, meaning moving and everything else, was considerably high. And at any point along the way, you could get sucker punched, right? Because of politics. No, not good, bad, or anything else. And I was like, that is just not a fight worth fighting.
That's how I make my money. I'm an executive coach. I love writing books. I love philosophy. I love all the stuff that we're talking about. What I do actually for a living is an executive coach, and I work with people. I work with basically superstars who are climbing the ladder super fast. And my job is to teach them how to go from super performers to leaders, and change that dynamic. But also for me, I don't really care about people, like success doesn't impress me. So I spend a lot of time creating the whole person. If you're going to be a corporate animal, how do you play the game without it having it eat you alive? How do you play the game, where you're creating relationships? How do you play the game so that it helps you inform your life? Right? I'm an entrepreneur. I used to love having somebody else pay my American Express and my health insurance. Like, I love that shit. But so I work with a lot of really talented people who love that structure, who love working in that framework. But how do you actually make that so that is what enhances your entire life, your relationships, your health, your well-being, and your enjoyment of life? So that's what I do all day, every day.
So let's talk about that and how that happens. But before we do, slight detour.
Sure.
I believe people can be helped by coaches. And you have actually worked with probably one of the top coaches in the world, if not the top. We've had past guests who've worked with Steve Hardison as well. Love to hear your thoughts on working with Steve and what did it help you achieve?
Yeah, that's something actually what I'll say is what Steve has helped me do is move from being a spiritual guy who stopped being interested in this world to being a spiritual guy who is creating the life that he has. That's a little bit out there. It's not a topic that I actually like to focus on.
Okay.
The man teaches possibility. The man teaches creating, the life that you want. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
That's cool. So how do we go from a super performer to a leader? And tell me what the difference is first.
So the first is kind of where your seat of self-knowledge is. Like, so when you're a super performer, you get your self-esteem by doing, by creating, by bringing value to the organization. When you get promoted to some level of vice president in charge of other people, you're no longer the doer, right? You have to go from individual contributor to success through others. So your skill set has to change. The same thing with your entrepreneurs. The larger the organization, you have an entrepreneur who is chief bottle washer and does everything all the time, right? As his organization grows, his job is less and less to do and more to make sure the right work gets done. His job is less and less to do and more to coach. He needs more my skills than he does any of the people that work for him skills. He needs to be able to get people to do the things they need to do. He needs to inspire them. He needs to create vision, right? He needs to hold people accountable. So same thing with people who rise from these high achievers to becoming a leader. Now you have to learn the skills of getting other people to perform to the level that you need them to perform. So now you also need to learn how to manage up. You have a leadership above you. You have collaborators. So if you're a vice president, you have other people of your level. So you have to learn how to collaborate across. Then you have to learn to lead a team. So you have to get yourself. I can't tell you how many times I've had a younger leader say, "I don't do anything anymore. What is my value to the organization? I actually don't do anything." No, your job actually is to go to Starbucks and sit and think and work on strategy and work on vision for your team, and then go back and help them achieve that. So you need to help other people shine, and you're going to get your self-esteem, but you're also going to get your value and your love from the organization by having your team shine, and the spotlight's not going to be on you. That's really hard for people. Really, really hard for people. But the next thing is, you have to learn that you are now them. So you're promoted to the leadership team. You used to be one of the guys, and it's them who drive you crazy. Now you're them. Now you speak for the leadership team. Now you speak for the organization. You can still lead with empathy. You can still have relationships, but you're no longer one of the guys, right? So you have to shift that loyalty and that gravity up the ladder. Next thing is holding people accountable. One of the main reasons I have a job and work with CEOs want me in their organization is because nobody wants to do the accountability feedback loop, right? So someone brings you a piece of work. How many times have you worked with someone or talked to someone who works until 2:00 in the morning? Why are they working until 2:00 in the morning? Because my people just don't give me the quality work that I need. So I spend till 2:00 in the morning fixing it all. Great. Have you taken the time to give them the feedback of how you want the work to be done, how you want it to look? Well, it's just easier to get it done. Right. So you're up until 2:00 in the morning and they're sleeping soundly. Great. Now let's work on giving feedback. How do you give feedback? And then you hold them accountable when they bring it back. Say, great, this is awesome. It would be even better if you could do this. Now go back and do it and bring it back. And you do that over and over again. What happens over time is you're creating new leaders. You're creating people to the level of support that you need so that you don't have to be up until 2:00 in the morning. People balk at that. It's just so much easier to do it yourself. So those are some of the shifts in consciousness that people need when they move into the leadership.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. I think one of the greatest things I heard from somebody was to ask a simple question. when they got a report, they said, "Is that the best you can do?" And the people would take the report back. They didn't even have to read it to determine whether or not they should send it back. And they would literally ask that question until the people finally said, yes. And it might be 4 or 5 rounds. But yeah, I think that's a very difficult thing to do, is to hold people accountable, because people don't like to get into confrontation. And so that makes part of it hard. And in today's world, we're all dealing with, how do you deal with employees when everybody's kind of free agents and they're bolting and so forth. And we talk about creating the culture and the vision, but it's hard to do that when you're in the middle of management, or it's got to come from a corporate leadership standpoint. And it's very difficult to do if that organization doesn't believe.
It is harder to do it, but I don't think it's impossible. I think a good leader and someone who is really invested in their leadership skills. There's a author, a coach named Alyssa Cohn. She wrote the book From Startup to Grown Up. Brilliant book. She starts the book off by saying, leadership is not an innate skill. There are very few born leaders. It's a learned skill. So, those who really learn to lead, I've watched people lead in horrible organizations, and when they go and move organizations, their people come with them, right? So again, the next skill that people need is enrollment skills, right? So you need to enroll people into your vision. You need to enroll people. So again, if you're a middle manager, you need to enroll your CEO. You need to enroll your fellow leaders on the same level, and you need to enroll your people into the vision that you have. And I see a lot of people saying, why do I have to fight upstream and why do I have to fight downstream? Because you're looking at it wrong. You're looking at it as fighting everybody to get your way, instead of knowing that it's your job to enroll them into your vision. So one of the things I teach my guys is, which hill do you want to die on? Right. So I generally work with hyper responsible people who just care about everything. Everything is important. And they go into leadership meetings and they just hammer everybody on everything. And nobody listens to them. I'm like, okay, which hill do you want to die on? Do you want to spend your political capital on everything, or do you want to pick what's important and enroll people into that vision? And once they start to learn to go laser focused instead of shotgun, they're much more effective in the organization.
And that makes a lot of sense. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit to your book, because I think this is what most people can probably relate to most, especially in today's world, right? Distraction and overwhelm. And so what inspired you to write the book, Only Tens, Using Distraction to Get the Right Things Done?
That's the original title. The new title is, so I wrote that 6 years ago. We rewrote the book and it's now called 2.0, and it's Confront Your To-Do List, Transform Your Life. And for me, I was an entrepreneur. I went from corporate world to an entrepreneur. And when I became a coach, nobody told me that I was going to be running a business, right? We talked about profit first before we turned on the microphone. I had no idea that I was running a business. I was told I'll be a coach and I'll make tons of money and it'll be all great. I didn't realize what it was. So, I never underestimate the power of having an asshole sales manager. Because when I had asshole sales managers, I performed. It wasn't the best way to get people to do things, but I performed. When I found myself in my own office and it was all up to me, I had a pretty lackadaisical sales manager. I had trouble getting myself to do things that I wanted to do, and I had severe ADD. So I decided that I wanted to get a PhD on how to get things done in a business with ADD. So I decided to write the book, and I wrote the book in 90 days. And I wrote this book about what if I only did what I really wanted to do? What I noticed was if there was a new iPhone, I was online at the Apple store. I noticed when I wanted to run the Marine Corps Marathon, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. There was one year where I said I wanted to make $1 million. I made $1 million. I did do things that I said I would do, but why was I having trouble in my day-to-day? And I realized that, oh my God, I lie to myself. I tell people I'll do things when I don't have no intention of ever doing it. I'll tell people, I'll be earnest and I'll say I want to do things because I was always all things to all people all the time, right? And I didn't know how to set boundaries. So I decided I was only going to do what I wanted to do or what I had committed to do. And I was going to get a PhD in how to get things done over the summer. So I write this book and I publish it on September 15th. And the first day it sells 1,000 copies. The next day it sells 1,000 copies. It had grammatical errors. It had spelling errors. I didn't know I needed a copy editor. Nobody told me I needed a copy editor. An ADD guy with like a 7th grade vocabulary wrote this book, and it's selling thousands and thousands of copies. People are giving it to CEOs. They're giving it to like substantive people. And I was wholly embarrassed. So we get to about 50,000 copies. And finally, we fixed all the grammatical errors and everything. And then 5 years later, we rewrote it because I've been coaching on it and coaching rising leaders on the principles of this for a while. So 2.0 came out, and we're about at 75,000 copies and counting right now. This thing where I take the to-do list and I show it to people, and I say, all right, why are things on your list? And I have people confront, like, oh, this is on my list because it needs to be delegated and I haven't delegated it. Why aren't you delegating it? And we have a whole conversation about why aren't you delegating it? This is on my list because I didn't set a boundary. I didn't tell someone no, right? So, oh my God, it turns out that we're lying to people, or we don't have these conversations with people about what we're willing to do, what we're capable of doing, what we have time to do, and we overwhelm ourselves. How many things are on your to-do list were on your list yesterday and the day before and the day before? So the book is called Only Tens. The definition of a 10 is it has to be done by me, and it has to be done by me today. Everything else gets crossed off for today. So when we start looking at that and we start looking at why things are on the list, all of a sudden I can take anybody, and in 20 minutes I can get them 8 to 10 hours back in their week in 15, 20 minutes.
That's powerful. I heard something similar to that, and I think it might have come out of, I don't know, it was the early 1900s. And it might have been, I forget what company, but it was basically, hey, for every executive, write down the 3 things that you need to do tomorrow. And in the morning, go do them. Don't do anything else until you do your 3 things, which seems like a very similar concept to what you're doing.
I would say because of the ADD, when it turns out to be 10 o'clock at night and you still haven't done those 3 things, but you have watched a lot of YouTube videos on how to paint a deck that you don't have, you get out of bed and you go do those things, right? So for me, I started to learn to keep my word to myself. I started to learn to tell the truth to other people. When someone would say, hey, would you do this? I would say, no, like that was really hard. No.
Why is saying no so hard?
Because I don't know about you, but I like to be liked. I get my self-esteem from how useful I am to everybody else in the world, right? So setting boundaries, most people I know don't set boundaries really well. Most people I know don't create strong agreements with people. So if you're delegating and you're delegating to someone in your organization and you say, all right, here's what you need to do. And I need it back, and I need it by Thursday. And you go away. You don't know if the person has the resources. You don't know if the person has you haven't had a conversation about this. They have no ownership. They've just been told what to do and when to have it done. So you really so Thursday comes around and you're like, where is it? Now you're screwed. If you took a couple of extra minutes and created an agreement there and said, okay, I need this by Thursday. Can you get that done? The person will say, you have these 3 other priorities for me. I don't have the resources. Would you like me to change my priorities, or do you want to give me another resource, right? Or can I get it to you by Monday? We can actually do it by Monday. Now you're in relationship and you're creating an agreement that both people have ownership over. But that takes, again, extra time, difficult conversation.
It doesn't sound difficult. It just sounds just what you have to do.
Again, you and I and you and most of the people that I work with are different. Most people find this a revelation, because they're just not as organized as you and thoughtful about things. It's I told them to do it. It should be done. And in a perfect world, that'd be great. But you're working with humans. And when you're working with humans, you got to coach.
That's what drives me crazy. Working with humans.
I bet. If it wasn't for humans, business would be so easy.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Actually, one of the big things that I do that people don't realize is I help my business owners figure out the next step. And we set a date and a time on it.
Right.
And I don't give them a ton. I give them 3 tops. These are the 2 or 3 things you need to get done. And then when we get together, I ask them, did you do it? And we go down like, oh, I forgot this. Oh, I didn't do that. Okay, well, we get it done by now. So some of them, it goes on for months.
Right, but they're paying you, and you don't have skin in the game.
Correct.
There, as if they were your employee, and your bottom line is dependent on that. Right, so you don't have the emotional baggage that goes along with them not keeping the agreement.
No, but I'll be honest with them and tell them.
Of course, that's your job.
Have to. So what else do you find with the people that you coach? Where else do they need help?
Girlfriends. I'm always talking about the girlfriends, whether they're married or not. Again, I coach the whole person. So, if the relationship in their life is causing some of the some of the distraction to what they're supposed to be doing, we have to deal with that. We have to work that out. And the primary relationship in your life is always important. So we talk about that quite a bit. We talk about kids all the time.
So this is the one that drives me up the wall, because I was very involved in my kids' life. And what I noticed was most dads aren't being dads. I don't know what you see with.
How do you mean?
They don't show up. They don't lead. They're not involved. Like, they're kind of like an accessory to what's going on in their kid's life. They're told to show up at some time. They show up at some time and they're on their phone. They're not at all interested in what's going on, other to yell at them going, how'd you miss that kick or whatever?
That's a perspective. I think most people are overwhelmed. Most people are doing everything they can. So they're, being at the baseball games, but being on the phone, trying to close a sale, but trying to be at the baseball game and trying to do everything. And they're tired and they're stressed. I don't know if you noticed, but the last few years, our allostatic load has been through the roof with COVID. Our schools open, our schools closed. You turn on Fox News or MSNBC. Now you know who to hate, right? It's just the stress level of the last several years, and before that, just in business and trying to do everything anyway, has been really high. And it, unfortunately, the kids definitely suffer. One of the things I say to my when I'm interviewing clients and when I'm talking to them, we'll talk about their goals, because I'm usually hired for business reasons. And I'll say, but now let's talk about you as a husband. Let's talk about you as a father, right? Let's talk about you as a member of the community. Because those are the things that I care about. I care about you being the kind of man that your wife needs as a husband. I need you to be the kind of father that your children need. So let's have that conversation. If you're not interested in that conversation, you're not going to be my client. So I agree with you that that's important, but I do understand that it's just really hard out there these days. I'm watching mental health and I'm watching addiction and I'm watching all the things that people sacrifice just to be in the 1%. And it's destroying us. We don't talk about it. We just put pretty pictures on Instagram, but most people are just trying to tread water.
Well, I guess from that standpoint, I lucked out in that COVID hit when I was just about done, meaning my kids were done with high school. I was done with giving up my life to spend all my time on all their events and so forth.
Mine too. I cannot imagine being anybody with kids at home and trying to figure out how to do childcare and keep a business going. It's absolutely over my head. I was fortunate enough to keep my wife home. And then when she was my ex-wife, I even kept her home with the kids. I paid through the roof. I paid tons of money so that my ex-wife could stay home with the kids until they graduated high school. That was an agreement we made.
So we did it the old-fashioned way.
You stayed married.
What? No. Even a more old-fashioned than that. Multi-generational living.
Oh, nice.
Because when you have multiple generations, it's no longer, when you have one kid, it's 2-on-1, right? And you get two, it's, you're each playing one. You get three, and now you're playing zone defense. But when you've got multiple adults in the house, you can all step out at different times when you need to. And it just takes so much of the stress away. And it takes a big chunk of the financial burden away.
Sure.
Because in the morning, the kid's sick. You go, sleep in, see ya. Someone will take care of you. You don't have to worry about it. There's always somebody there that can step up in the moment and help out. And so I think you got to really rethink the way you build your life and do that. And I think that's one of the things that COVID and the recession is kind of pushing people back to maybe multi-generational. You're seeing a lot of the younger kids come back home in their 20s and doing those types of things. So who knows? Maybe it will change. Maybe it won't. But it also comes back to me. I think one of the biggest things that I guess I struggled with when looking at other fathers is where you started off earlier is accountability. Are they holding their kids accountable? And they're holding themselves accountable to what needs to be done for the family. Because at the end of the day, you can drop the work ball all you want and it will bounce. When you drop the family balls, they all crack and break. They don't bounce back in the same way. And so you have to be very, very diligent in understanding that work balls can always bounce. What's the worst that happens? You get fired, you can go find another job, unfortunately, and you move on. But it's all good. So let's shift gears again. I know you're a fan of Profit First. I'd just love to hear how that's worked out for you, what that's done for you.
So when we talked about, when I became a coach, I didn't understand the fact that I was going to be an entrepreneur. So I just did not, when I was a sales guy, I made tons of money. I always made more money than I could spend. Right. So it was really, and I had an ex-wife who, took care of all the finances, paid the taxes, did all that stuff. When I went out on my own, I didn't have a roadmap for it. And when I finally, it took me until about year 4 to treat my business like a business. So I started taking care of things, sales and tracking and all that stuff. And then I read Profit First. And it was, for me, the simplest way to understand, way back when I first got sober, I was in Debtors Anonymous also. And to get out of debt in Debtors Anonymous, you put money in envelopes. Here's my clothes money. Here's my food money, that kind of thing. And when I read Profit First, I was like, oh my God. So when I get paid a lot of money from my clients. For me, it's like, oh, great. I need a new laptop. Because I'm the kind of guy who gets a new car every 2 years, right? An ex-poor kid, just has to have shiny objects. But with Profit First, I actually get $20,000 and put $5,000 in the checking account, in the tax account. Oh my God. Now that the last couple of years, I've paid my taxes ahead of time. It's just crazy that you can do that. Then you put the savings and then you put the operations money. It was game changer for me. It was the simplest roadmap. Go out, stop reading the book, go out, open your checking accounts and your saving account. Okay, I'll do that. And you go to the bank and the bank teller, the bank person looks like you're crazy. Why do you need all these accounts? Just open the accounts. I'll figure that out. Game changer for me. The one thing I didn't do that I think I'm going to do this year is have an account at another bank so that I don't see that money. Put money in that bank, because again, I am not good with money.
Neither is Mike. And Mike, not only does he have the money at another bank, he needs a second signature.
I'm with him. He does see. I love that you said that because he seems like an earthy kind of guy who needs his own program.
He does. He gets a profit check and he goes and buys an ATV and he goes off into the woods with his kids and he blows it up. He's like, that was fun. Next. So yeah, he needs controls in place. That's all. It's all right. It's all good. And so that's what it is. And that's what it does. And yeah, it's based on the envelope
mine's a
system.
saltwater fish tank. So I sink all my money into my saltwater fish tank.
It's funny you said you stopped reading the book and you went to the bank and you opened the accounts. Because
But he said to do that.
okay, so Mike goes on stages all the time. And people come up to him. They go, "Oh, Mike, we love you. The book is great. This is phenomenal." He's like, "Did you open the bank accounts?" And they're like, "No." The number one thing I hear from people who talk about profit first, the first question we ask is, "Did you open the bank accounts?" Because that little step stops everybody. And it's just amazing. So the fact that you stopped and did it, that puts you in the 1%. See, because the rest of them, they don't do that step.
Thank you. I put out a arrogant solo podcast last week called "If You Want What I Have, Do What I Do," because people say to me all the time, "Mark, you're just so peaceful. You're so, like you take everything in stride, like all that stuff." Really? That's not my natural state of being. I wake up every morning at 5:30. I sit on my meditation cushion. I journal. I read something spiritual. I get myself right, and then I go about my day. If you want what I have, do what I do. It's not arrogant. It's just I put a lot of work into creating who I am today. And
most people aren't willing to pay the price you need to pay to have the success they want to have. And that's unfortunate. Or they get stuck in a machine, which is what most of your clients are. They're stuck in a machine. Get up at 5:30, start reading your emails. They get suckered into everything.
I would say most of my I have to say most of my clients aren't stuck in the machine. They choose the machine and they're gaming the machine, because they're pretty high performers and they're making shit tons of money. But I'm teaching them how not to get eaten up by the machine, play the machine so that they can live their life.
Correct. Again, you're talking to top performers, not the average people who are stuck in corporate.
Right, and that's why one of the reasons why I'm building courses. I'm writing my new book is going to be called The Rising Leader Handbook, and my course so that people can because people can't afford an executive coach, but some of these concepts of how to set boundaries, how to create a life within those organizations, because we need people in corporate. We need people to have 9-to-5 jobs so that the world runs, right? But we need I'd like to see those people happy too.
I totally agree. And I think there's tons of resources out there. Again, it comes back to the same thing. Buy the book, read the book, do what it says. Just what you did with Profit First.
Exactly.
So we always like to get people to take action. What's an action step people can take this week to move forward in their life?
I'm going to actually tell you. So I created a page of resources for your listeners. I'll send you the link that'll be specifically for your listeners. With some of the concepts in my book. And what I'd love for them to do is I'd love for them to go and look at the video of difficult conversations and agreements versus expectations. Those are going to be 2 worksheets and 2 videos that they can go do on my website. And to have a sweaty palm, difficult conversation, to either set a boundary, to ask for what they want, to delegate something, and watch how, when speaking up, will change your life. If you can master the art of the difficult conversation, your life will never be the same. And I give up, most of my clients won't read my book. So they ask me to make little 5-minute videos of all the concepts in the book so they don't have to read the book. So I've given you guys some of those 5-minute videos so you don't have to read my book either.
There's actually a book called Difficult Conversations.
There's a couple of them, and it's just such a skill to learn to change your life.
It's another one of those things they don't teach you in school.
No.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Letting go of my personality and my conditioning and having a contemplation practice to come from a different source.
It's hard to let go.
It's very hard to let go. And, as I tell people, I have the monkey mind that just goes on like crazy. I just choose not to listen to it, but it takes practice to step out.
It takes a lot of practice. What did you learn later in life that you wished you would have learned sooner?
That I'm free, that I actually create my life, that I've made choices and decisions, and that I never really had to do anything that I did, that I'm free and that I get to create.
That's cool. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Don't drink and don't smoke pot.
They tell them that in high school.
That's not a moral thing. It's just what I do see, the trap I see people falling into, and I see teenagers falling into is pot has been demystified, and on developing brains, pot, alcohol, and porn are really killing dopamine receptors and the ability to grow. And if they can stay away from that for a few more years, I think that would change their lives.
That and their iPhone. It's all dopamine, right? It's all getting the quick hit and learning to turn that off. And unfortunately, it seems like we're getting more and more of it instead of less and less of it.
Yeah.
If people would like to learn more about you, your services, your book, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just markjsilverman.com, mark_Silverman.com. Everything is there. My courses will be there. And then the link that I'll give you for your show notes for your people to go to those videos.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us today.
We meandered through some really cool topics. Thank you.
That we did. If I asked you, are you free? What would your answer be? Do you feel overwhelmed? Can you say no? The power of no is amazing, because every time you say yes, you are actually saying no to something else. So be careful to choose your no's and your yeses so you are doing what you love. Was there something else you were able to take away from today's episode? This week's action step: check out his video on difficult conversations and ask for what you want. You don't ask, you don't get it. These conversations are called difficult for a reason, but once we master them, they become easy. It also helps to ease the tension and when everyone is on the same page, and you get the results you wanted. Don't forget to delegate. By the way, you heard a little bit about Profit First today. We are launching a Profit First course in the near future. If you are interested in this, there is a link in the show notes to sign up, and we'll let you know when it's ready. No spam or any of that other stuff. Next week, we have on Jonathan and Renee Harris to talk about parenting their passions. How do we get our kids to launch early, maybe even skip college? I know you'll love the episode. If you enjoyed today's episode and you know someone who could benefit, would you mind sharing it with them? I would appreciate that. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.